U.S. Modernist Radio is part of DesignNetwork.org, exclusive architecture and design podcasts reaching creative listeners worldwide.
Hi, I'm Diana Panton, and thanks for listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. Joining us are Danielle Willkens, author of the new book, Architecture for Teens, a beginner book for aspiring architects. And we also have an actual teen, Louisa Whitmore, a TikTok architecture critic from our favorite jazz nation, Canada. Also, later on from Canada, jazz with Sophie Milman. And now here's your host, not from Canada, Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, folks. Have you noticed we're a little obsessed with Canada lately?
Uh-huh.
Honestly, I'm just not sure what's going on. Perhaps it's just a mathematical anomaly, like when you hit red in roulette 10 times in a row. Canada just keeps coming up an unusual number of times. We don't actively seek Canadian guests. We just book interesting people, but sure enough, a lot of them are from Canada. Maybe there's something mysterious afoot. Because it's so fashionable these days, let's start a conspiracy theory.
Oh, no.
Is Justin Trudeau putting mind control drugs in their maple syrup exports?
What?
Did Justin Bieber tattoo U.S. Modernist Radio on his arm? Is Celine Dion secretly beaming high-intensity tones across the border? Is William Shatner living in my basement?
Now, that's a reference to Shatner's very short 2010 TV series, Shit My Dad Says, and he's also Canadian.
It turns out a huge number of celebrities are from Canada. Justin Bieber, Pamela Anderson, Nia Vardalos from My Big Fat Greek Wedding, Carrie Ann Moss from Matrix 1, 2, 3, and I hear a fourth. Shania Twain, who I always thought was from Nashville, Seth Rogen, Ryan Reynolds, and the wonderful Leonard Cohen we talked about with past podcast guest Jennifer Warnes. We're going to have to do a show from Canada one day, Tom.
Where do you want to go?
Well, we could go to Vancouver, where our guest Louisa Whitmore lives. We could go to Oak Island in Nova Scotia and help those guys on cable TV shove dirt around cluelessly while looking for nice temperature. We could go to the Canadian side of Niagara Falls, which has some very cool mid-century buildings and a better view of the falls than on the U.S. side. But today, I'm thinking we should go to the Montreal, Canada Biosphere.
Ah, yes.
A huge dome designed by Buckminster Fuller from the 1967 World Expo.
I've seen it.
It's still stunning, 54 years later, and it would make a great location for a few shows. We could use email, but why waste a good Morse code sound effect?
Attention Biosphere. Biosphere, come in please. Biosphere, do you read?
George, you're talking like it's ham radio, but we're using Morse code? I
think it'll work.
Okay.
Calling Biosphere. Biosphere, come in please. This is a Priority 1 message for Acting Director Julie at the Biosphere in Montreal, Canada. Hello, Acting Director Julie. Are you there? Acting Director Julie. This is George Smart of U.S. Modernist Radio. Just a thought. At your staff meeting this week, think about inviting me and Tom up to tape a few shows in the Biosphere.
I know some French.
We'll talk about the integration of the iconic building into the Space for Life complex. And we'll talk about Bucky Fuller, the world's most incomprehensible genius.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll have a musical guest from our growing roster of Canadian jazz artists. Acting Director Julie, all channels are open for your reply. End of transmission.
Well, I guess it worked. We'll find out soon.
We'll find out soon. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Wendy Robineau and Don Beskin, and by modernist realtor Angela Roll.
In the Atlantic Ocean near Boston, a fishing boat rescues a raft containing a woman in a red cocktail dress, a DeWalt toolkit, and an old iPhone 4, still working but wiped clean. The woman has no memory of who she is, but the ship's doctor finds a tattoo on her ankle with the address of an In-N-Out burger and the words triple-double animal-style Dostoevsky. When the ship docks, she drives cross-country to Thousand Palms just outside sunny Palm Springs, California. Relying on her undergraduate degree in Russian literature, she knew, like we all do at some level, that Fyodor Dostoevsky's profound examinations of the human soul would be the key to finding the most satisfying burger on the secret menu. To her shock, the In-N-Out burger is closed, but she grabs her trusty heavy-duty DeWalt drill and breaks in. Steel doors fall down behind her. Unusual for an In-N-Out, but hey, it's our story. Then the iPhone rings. Someone says,
"Hello, Angela Roll."
will she escape to one day rent scooters on Mykonos? Tune in next time for more of The Roll Identity. Meanwhile, memory restored, modernist realtor Angela Roll specializes in modernist houses, advising buyers and sellers on everything from appropriate renovation to whether Pushkin or Chekhov would win a rap battle. Reach her at angelaroll.com, that's ROEHL, or 919-995-0550. Oh, no worries, that In-N-Out burger in Thousand Palms is still very much open.
Thank you, Tom. Danielle Willkens is an assistant professor of architectural design and history at Georgia Tech. Go Yellow Jackets. She previously taught at Auburn, Big Orange, Paul Rudolph's alma mater, and she won a Brooks Traveling Fellowship that took her to Iceland, Cuba, and Japan. She's the author of a new book, Architecture for Teens, a beginner book for aspiring architects. Welcome, Danielle.
Hi, thanks very much for having me.
So, Danielle, in a recent interview with our friends at Madam Architect, you said you are, and I quote, too much of a historian for architects and too much of a designer for historians. So I like you already. What's in that zone between architecture and history?
Well, I'm most interested in how we use the amazing tools that we have today for contemporary practice in terms of digital documentation and visualization, so things that we can do with modeling and animations, how we use those to actually study the past and visualize the past in a way that really helps bring it to life. So I think that's where my interest in that gray area really comes to fruition, and it's a good excuse to play with interesting toys that are coming out in the technological realm, but then also, spend some time in archives and go see amazing places and try to think of ways that we can, bring attention to them and also make sure that they're around for future generations.
So I know this is a deep question, but I'm going to try to be superficial about it. How do the tools that we look at history affect the way we view history?
Well, I think it's about talking to the audience. And so if we're just in a realm where we're using, maybe text or something that's a little bit more static, it's hard to engage, a younger generation. It's hard to engage people who maybe aren't familiar with the language of the architecture or even a historical period, to get them really excited about what they're seeing or maybe get them intrigued to learn more. So I think the more we can add to that visual culture, we're so much of a visual culture, the better, because it's going to get people excited about the past and learning more.
How did you find enough teens to talk to for your book that weren't busy on TikTok?
I've been really fortunate for a number of years to work with Duke University's talent identification program. So Duke TIP.
Oh, yeah. We know them.
So did it.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I had kids in that TIP program myself, actually.
Excellent. Yeah, it's an amazing program going under kind of a reinvention right now, but I did a number of on-campus camps with them, and then we also developed an online independent learning sequence, and then also for a number of years, kind of pre-pandemic, and now online learning is becoming, quite a norm, but for about 6 years had done online programming with them in the summer. And then was very fortunate when I was at Auburn to work with the summer camps there that were for rising 5th through 8th graders at our Birmingham design camp, and then rising juniors and seniors on campus. So had a lot of in-person and online time with kids and teens, and was really just energized by their curiosity. And it's super exciting to introduce someone to architecture and really see when that spark catches.
Every generation brings their own point of view and wants to let go of something from the past. What do you see in that with the current teens that you've been working with?
I mean, I think obviously the interest in technology and in sustainability. I think what's really exciting about talking to younger students now is it's not seen as kind of an aspirational goal for a project to be truly green, but instead seen as the norm, which I think is a spectacular attitude and really the one we need to have. And so thinking, how do we go above and beyond buildings that are simply not doing harm to the environment, but rather can actually ameliorate the area around them. And I think that attention to performance of a building, whether it's related to energy, but then also kind of the social characteristics of buildings, that good design needs to be accessible to everyone. I think those are some really big points that the younger generation is completely dedicated to, which is super exciting.
What can the architecture profession do? Because they're a little slow to innovate, as we all know.
Sure.
To engage the younger people, engage teenagers to want to pursue this in college.
Yeah, and I think it does go to getting students younger. So reaching out just beyond, a high school career fair or something like that, that's excellent. We need to do that. We need to do more of it. But I think getting students excited about design when they're younger. I mean, I think a lot of us very easily say we enjoy playing with Legos, and maybe still do. I'll admit to that. But, how do we capture that kind of curiosity for the built environment and for imagination? But in some ways, as students get a little bit older, maybe starts to slip away as there's kind of reinforcing other aspects of their education, or also realizing that architecture is part of STEM, whether we call it STEAM or STEM, but, it's right in there with it. And so I think it's just about getting students earlier, being out there for those who are architects, be out in your community, volunteer, get engaged with kids through volunteer organizations for after school tutoring or whatever it may be. I think in our virtual world, there's some really great opportunities that have popped up. But I think just getting kids out there and letting them understand what the profession actually is at a younger age is critical.
When we've talked with architects who are older, who were born before 1985, they have this very romantic notion about drawing, hand drawing, being better than anything that has ever existed. And I'm wondering if today's generation feels that way as well, or if they're just perfectly fine with using the computer.
I definitely have to say that drawing is critical. If you're on site working through a problem, you're most likely not going to pull out your laptop and do a model of it. Instead, you're going to grab, the napkin that's next to you and a pen and sketch it out. So I do think sketching is essential. Obviously, there's all kinds of different ways we can do that through a digital interface now, but drawing is still very important. I think there's a different connection between the hand and the mind that doesn't really translate to a mouse. Maybe we'll get there. There are some things that are changing in computer-aided design programs that are a little bit more drawing-like, which I think could be useful as we move forward. But I would encourage any student who's interested in architecture, one of the first things to do is get a sketchbook and just start looking around you and sketching and imagining, what else could be.
What are good resources for teens interested in the profession? Because I've noticed when I've talked with many different teenagers around North Carolina, some of them aren't even aware that there's an architecture school in Raleigh and an architecture school in Charlotte. How do we get more information to kids that might want to see design as a profession?
There's a couple good resources online. For example, archcareers.org is a really good one. The other thing, architecture degrees can be confusing, and that's something there's a little chart in the book because I think it's a hard one to explain when students are looking into colleges exactly what is a professional degree versus a pre-professional degree. One isn't better than the other from an undergraduate standpoint, in my opinion. It's just a different way of going about it. And so the National Architecture Accrediting Board, so NAB, is going to be the main resource for that. And it'll show where the accredited architecture schools are. It talks a little bit about the different paths. And I would just reach out. I would encourage anyone to reach out to their local chapter of maybe the American Institute of Architects, the AIA, or the National Organization of Minority Architects, NOMA. There's chapters all over the country, a lot of really active state chapters, and just see if they have a group that would be willing to talk to a student, or they might have some resources online that a student could tap into.
The book is Architecture for Teens, a beginner book for aspiring architects. Danielle Willkens. Thanks, Danielle.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Louisa Whitmore is the fresh face of architectural criticism. She's a British Columbia teenager who has a keen interest in architectural design. When she's not discussing building aesthetics, she's acting in community theater productions, or baking bread, or reading Jane Austen, On her TikTok account, Louisa Talks Buildings, Louisa talks 90 miles an hour about buildings she likes and others like 432 Park in New York City, the tallest residential tower in the world when it was built. Not so much. She's got a huge following, reminding us of past podcast guest Kate Wagner in her show McMansion Hell. Because she's in school, George had to talk to her on a teacher workday.
Hi, Louisa. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. How are you?
Good. I first read about you on Curbed. That was the big article. Was that the first one in the major papers about you?
Yeah, it was. That was really exciting.
Curbed really focused on the fact that you have become the architecture critic of TikTok.
Yeah, honestly, I was even surprised by that. So it was very funny to see like a major news organization talking about that.
Other than our esteemed little organization, have any folks reached out to you?
Not really.
Okay.
One or two, but mostly just you guys.
Oh, great. So we got here. We're number 2. Excellent. Well, we want to be on the leading edge of tomorrow's architecture critics. How did you get started being interested in design? Was it through something like Minecraft or through another way you found out about it?
Well, I've always been like really interested in like looking at buildings, and you're kind of right. Like sometimes when I was a kid, I would like see a building and think, oh, I want to recreate that in Minecraft. And I would do that. And it was really cool to like see the different aspects of buildings. But I really got interested in like design and architecture specifically after I saw 432 Park Avenue in New York. And I couldn't believe that it was like a real building because it just looked if you haven't seen it, it's incredibly skinny and it's just straight up. It just goes straight up in the air. It looks like a toothpick. And I thought, that's weird. How would you design that? And I just started thinking about like the designs of other buildings as well.
So 432 really got you on the map with TikTok.
Yeah, I did not expect that at all. Because I've been using my TikTok to talk about like things I was passionate about. And then I thought, hey, you know what I'm passionate about? This one building. And people really responded to that, which was weird.
For our listeners who've never seen this, describe what 432 is like and how it's different from other buildings.
Okay. So in New York, the New York skyline is beautiful. There's all of these different types and shapes of buildings, and they just come together to create this like beautiful, I would call it like an artwork. Like it's all put together so nicely. And then there's 432 Park Avenue, which is, I don't think it is, but it appears to be about twice as tall as all of the other ones and has zero setbacks. It's just straight up. There's nothing, it doesn't go in like a lot of other buildings in New York do. It just goes up and it just looks like a block kind of that someone just put in the middle of New York, and it's very confusing and disconcerting.
And this is called a super tall, right? I believe that's the official phrase. Super tall.
Yeah, when it was constructed, it was the tallest residential building in the world. And since it was constructed, a couple more super talls have been built in New York.
Oh, even taller than that one?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
So how tall is this thing exactly?
It is 426 meters tall, or it's over like 1,000 something feet, but it's insanely tall. It's taller than the Empire State Building. It's massive.
And what was your opinion about this very tall building?
Oh, I hate it. I hated it when I first saw it. I hate it now. And I just think it stands out too much.
So let's put on your critic hat and have you tell me, what is it to hate about this building? Because I've also done some other research about how it's going over there, and I want to ask you about those things in a minute.
So the thing with it is, it doesn't seem to me like there was any design, like actual thought put into it. There's nothing very like visually interesting about it besides just how tall it is. And I would be like a little bit okay with that if it wasn't, I'm okay with it being tall. It's just that it's like so, sorry, I'm struggling to find an answer. The people who live in it are all incredibly rich, and none of the apartments are really used that often, because everyone who can afford an apartment in it can afford other apartments. So they don't really live there a whole lot of the time. So it's just kind of this big empty building that you have to look at from anywhere. like anywhere you're standing.
Do you have any sense of what it costs to own a place in this building?
Yes. So the penthouse apartment, according to a Zillow listing, is $90 million. And the cheapest apartment is over $7 million. And that doesn't include all of the yearly maintenance fees and the private restaurant fee that, number one, you can't even go to because of COVID. And number two is over $15,000 annually.
Wow. That's quite a bunch of fees. I mean, my HOA I thought was expensive, but that's pretty up there.
Mm-hmm.
So these are absentee owners in large part?
Yeah. And a lot of them, I learned most of this from a New York Times article that came out in like February, I think.
Okay.
And according to it, a lot of them have their identity concealed by shell companies, which is also very weird that they're hiding who they are to buy an apartment in it.
I assume these are just some kind of wild speculative investment. They're hoping that being in one of the tallest buildings in the world, they'll make money on it over time. That's the idea.
Yeah. And I think we're starting to see that because some people have started to sell their apartments that they've like fully renovated and designed, and they've like hired people to design like new walls and furniture and stuff. So it does seem like an investment.
It seems like from your TikTok replies and comments that a lot of people resonated with you in not liking these super talls in New York, that they seemed out of scale.
Yeah, I honestly don't think it would be that awful of a building if it was to scale with the rest of the buildings. But I think a lot of people see a building that's that tall as like trying to like draw your attention, and it just annoys people, I think.
What have you learned since you started talking about it, about the building itself? Have you ever gotten to talk to any of the residents in it or some of the people that have been experiencing the problems recently? Like, I understand they had some issues with water leaks and other kinds of structural components.
I haven't gotten the chance to talk with anyone who's actually lived there, but they did do some interviews for that New York Times article. And I thought it was so interesting hearing all of them complain about all of its problems, because the apartments are worth millions of dollars. I feel like they can figure out some of that stuff if the people living in them are paying tens of millions of dollars. Like, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me that they would have multiple floods and an elevator that like doesn't work most of the time and all of that sort of stuff.
Was it when you were about 10 you started using these digital tools to create buildings?
Yeah, I really liked using like Minecraft to make like my own castles, because I really like castles and it's not like we have any here. So I thought that's really cool. And I'm trying to remember, but I used some sort of like CAD software to like 3D model towers because I thought those were really cool. And I think I 3D printed a tower I designed, but I cannot remember where it ended up. But yeah, I was around 10 when I started like actually getting into that.
That's pretty cool. And not many 10-year-olds are 3D printing their own towers. Now, in addition to architecture, you seem to have a great interest in, I don't know if it's acting or history. I saw a news report that you did on was it the Romeo and Juliet situation?
So, yeah, that was for a school project where we had to come up with like a fun way to reenact a scene from Romeo and Juliet. And I decided to summarize the fight scene where Mercutio is stabbed by Tybalt and then Romeo stabs Tybalt. Sorry, Romeo and Juliet spoilers. Yeah. I hope you're caught. I decided to summarize that by pretending to be a newscaster and like doing a news broadcast about that. And it was really fun to write.
Well, when I watched it, I mean, you were dead on. You could have been right out of WNBC. I mean, you had the right facial expression. You were very serious about this breaking news. Was it Verona? Is that where they're set? I forget the town.
The reason I looked so serious was because I couldn't remember the lines I'd written because I'd only like just written them and then I ran to go film it.
Well, you certainly have great TV presence for that. I think you should consider broadcasting as well as architecture.
Thank you.
Now, since you started talking about 432, you moved on to a whole variety of buildings. So tell me about some of the things you've been chatting about recently.
Yeah, so I was really surprised when I started talking about 432 Park Avenue. I was immediately getting comments from people asking me to talk about their buildings that they hate, because it seems like everybody's got just like one or two buildings that they don't like at all. So I started doing that. And then I started going into more like architecture I do actually like. And I covered some buildings I do like. Like I really like a lot of Parliament buildings. And I really like specifically buildings that look like they were built for like an evil villain lair in a children's movie. I think those are incredible.
Like which one? Which one do you comes to mind?
Oh, there are a lot of them. I just recently, like last week, I think I made a video on Casa Brutal, which is a design of a house built into a cliff overlooking the ocean and it's going to be built in Beirut, I believe. And I just thought that was so fun because it really looks like something that a James Bond villain would live in. Like that's just, there was a pool on the top and then everything else was below the pool. Like that's really funny, I think.
Here's Louisa talking about Casa Brutal.
Look, I've said it before and I will say it again. I love a good evil villain lair. But something about this just seems too intentional. Like the architect of it designed it with the express purpose of sitting in it, staring out at the sea, contemplating on how to like end the world or something. So this rendering of Casa Brutal is from 2015, but this building is actually going to be constructed in Beirut, Lebanon. The top of this building is a swimming pool and sunlight refracts through it into the rest of the house. That is the most Bond villain thing I can think of. That is exactly what I would expect from the evil villain's lair of a semi-good action movie. That's like cinematography. But according to the architect, the influences for the house were not in fact spy movies, but partially the song On the Sea by Beach House. And I think that is very cool because if you like listen to the song, you can get a sense of the vibe of the house.
What about buildings here in the U.S.? What are some of the places that you really like, Louisa?
Okay, I have expressed this opinion on my TikTok and I found that a lot of people disagree, but one of my favorite buildings is the Museum of Pop Culture in Seattle, the MoPop.
Is that the Frank Gehry building?
Yes, it is. And it's like all colors and like funky shapes. And I just think it's really cool to look at. And I think it's perfect for the purpose of it, which is like the museum, which is that sort of funky vibe that the actual building has.
It is pretty cool. And I think it has the monorail that goes through the bottom of it, right?
Yes. Yeah.
The old 1960s World's Fair monorail that is still going after all this time. I've ridden it before. It's pretty amazing. Have you gotten to visit Seattle and seen some of those buildings?
Yes, I have. I actually used to live outside of Seattle. So I've been down there a few times and we visited the MoPop and it was really cool.
It is pretty cool. Frank Gehry, I think, is in his 90s now and still going strong.
Mm-hmm. It's very impressive.
Now, one building I think you might not like that I'm crazy about, just throw out one, is the Zaha Hadid Port Building in Antwerp, Belgium. So what are your thoughts on that? Because that's one of my favorites. I know it's completely out of place, but it just seems like it's the future.
I understand that if that's like what you like, but I really don't. The building itself is like this old historical building. I believe it was a fire station or something, and they turned it into the Port Authority building by adding this weird, I'm calling it weird, but that's just my opinion.
It's fair enough. It's weird. Yeah.
Glass bulb on top, sort of. And to me, it just looks like an alien spaceship landed on that building. And it doesn't really say Port Authority to me, you know? I don't love it.
It does kind of look like the prow of a ship, though. I think that was the idea, was to give it some kind of symbology. But I'll agree with you 100%. It's completely out of place with the existing building.
I think it's also supposed to represent like diamonds, which is possibly important in Belgium and in that port specifically, which I understand. I just don't love it.
Have you looked at any of other Zaha Hadid buildings around the world?
Not closely. Like I've seen them, but I haven't like researched them heavily.
Okay. I think you would really enjoy getting to know her work because she's a superstar. It's too bad we lost her a number of years ago, but her firm has been going really strong since then. and building these amazing structures all around the world, just like Bjarke Ingels and Norman Foster and some of the other really well-known world architects.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on in Vancouver? I understand that there's a Bjarke Ingels building there, Vancouver House, that is not doing very well lately.
Yeah. So as of a couple days ago, when this is being recorded, the Bjarke Ingels building in Vancouver, I'm not sure if it's the only one, but I think so, Vancouver House actually flooded. They had a pipe problem, and it's going to take a while to repair. I think it'll be repaired by the time this podcast is released. But it's interesting to hear about stuff like that, considering I made a video about Vancouver House a while ago, which, if you haven't seen it, the thing with it is that it's widest at the top, and then it narrows on the way down. So it's super skinny on the bottom. It's like a triangle, and then it opens up to like a full building at the top of it. And that's just very confusing to me.
It makes you wonder how it holds up, how it stands, right?
I'm sure the engineers did a good job, but I'm always so impressed and confused when I see buildings like that.
I always enjoy talking with the structural engineers, who are usually the unsung heroes behind these architects' achievements, because they're the ones whose license is on the line. If the building falls down, it's usually not the architect.
Yeah, good for them. I applaud them.
It's a tough job being a structural engineer, because if you're trying to do some things that have never necessarily been done before, and you're creating these wild shapes that have to hold up to, a lot of stories. How many stories tall was 432? Do you remember? Was it like 60, 70?
No, I believe it's 85.
85 stories.
Yeah.
For a residential building.
Yes.
Wow.
Insane.
I can remember years ago when in most towns across the United States, except for maybe New York and LA and Chicago, if you were building a 20-story building, that was a big deal. And that was huge. But, now we're talking about things that are just really reaching up towards the sky. Frank Lloyd Wright at one time was going to try to build a mile-high building. So that's 5,280 feet.
Yeah, I think I remember hearing about that. And I always was so confused as to why we stopped trying to do that. But now I think that would really be a bad idea.
I would guess, especially with changes in the climate and earthquakes and things like that, it would be hard to keep that thing from swaying wildly when it's moving in the wind.
One of the things that confuses me about not just 432 Park, but a lot of all tall buildings, is that to prevent earthquake damage, they have to sway slightly. So when you have a really, really tall, a super tall, like 432 Park or any of the ones near it, or any of the super talls near it, they have to sway multiple feet in either direction. And especially, if you had a mile-high building, you would have to go meters and meters away. It would sway back and forth so far, so it didn't fall down.
I imagine that would be rather disconcerting to be in your kitchen making coffee, and the coffee is moved a foot.
Yeah, it would be like being on a cruise ship, probably, or worse.
Yeah,
worse than that,
under
probably.
Choppy seas. Right.
Yeah.
What is in your queue for reviewing on TikTok? What other buildings are you looking at now?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I don't really have a lineup of buildings I'm going to talk about. I do want to talk about Vancouver House flooding. I just want to bring that up. I made a video, but I want to go more in depth on the concept of the sinking library, which apparently a lot of universities students believe that their specific university library is sinking because the architect, while designing it, forgot to account for the weight of the books, which is kind of the funniest thing I've ever heard.
You've got my attention now. Tell me more about sinking libraries.
Okay, so I started noticing this when I made a video about Robarts Library at the University of Toronto, because it looks like a turkey. That's why I was talking about it. But I got several comments from people saying, oh yeah, that library is slowly sinking because while designing it, the architect forgot to account for the weight of the books. So when they put all the books inside, it just started going down very slowly. And I thought, wow, that's a weird story. But I did some research and I found out that it was just an urban legend. And then I started hearing it about other libraries. I have a list of about like 6 or 7 university libraries that people literally believe are sinking, even though there's no evidence towards that. The H.B. Wells Library at Indiana University, their official or unofficial motto is not sinking since 1969.
Wow. That's their motto.
Yeah. To convince people that, the library is not sinking.
Hopefully it was built in 1969, right? But
it was. Yeah, that's
okay.
A good clarification. I thought they fixed it in 1969, but it was built in 1969.
Okay.
So it's fine.
So was there one library somewhere that actually sank that was the creation of this urban legend?
It's unclear. I tried to do some research, and there are a couple of libraries it may have come from that had like weird numbered floors. So people thought, oh, one of them is below ground or something. But or it came from like, oh, this area of the library is closed off and there's no books in there. And then that somehow became, it's closed off and there's no books in there, so the library won't be too heavy and sink into the ground. But I really don't know the exact origin.
Are there any like leaning libraries where the books were on the wrong side of the building and it tilted it? That seems to be a variation of this theme.
Not that I know of, but it sounds kind of likely.
I always, when I was growing up, thought the Leaning Tower of Pisa was because somebody put the furniture too much over on the wrong side. And it just...
I always thought that they just built it on purpose to look like that. I just figured they did that. I figured that was the point.
Yeah. I believe they spent umpteen million shoring it up, but it still leans. It just doesn't lean quite as much, I think, as it used to.
Yeah. I think they spent a lot of money so they could prevent it from falling over. And then they couldn't get it all the way back up.
Now, I don't know this for sure, but what's your guess about when the Leaning Tower of Pisa was built?
I have no idea. I would say 15th century or maybe later. Maybe I'm way off.
I think 15th century. So here's what I would love to see, Louisa. I would love to see a news report of you in the 15th century reporting on the Leaning Tower of Pisa as a sequel to your famous broadcast on the Juliet and Romeo situation.
Okay. That's a really funny idea.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has just been a blast.
Oh, I'm so glad I could. This has been really fun.
We're talking to Sophie Milman today, who lives in, where else? Toronto. Damn you and your mind-controlling maple syrup, Justin Trudeau. She's won a Juno, been nominated for a Grammy for recording in a language she doesn't even speak, and her albums have spent weeks at the top of the Billboard, iTunes, and Amazon jazz charts around the world. She can really sing. One day, say in 2050, critics will compare young jazz singers to Sophie, like we compare people to Billie Holiday and Julie London now. But there's more. I want Sophie and her husband at my next dinner party. She's interested in global money markets, industrial relations, economics, and social sciences. She's an active writer. Her husband, Casey, is a lawyer, professor, musician, and executive producer on her albums. I assume that her children perform laser surgery, trade cryptocurrency, and run their own small nuclear reactor in the basement. And one time, she threw a Muppets party for her husband's birthday. How cool is that? Welcome, Sophie.
Hi. This is the best introduction anyone has ever given me, and the funniest. And I've been interviewed a lot over the years, and in many different places. George, you're killing me.
Don't die yet.
Yeah, don't die yet. So
No. I give you 20 minutes.
Tell us about this Muppets party.
Oh, the Muppet Party. So my husband turned 35. And yeah, we're Muppet nerds. The Muppet Show is big in our house. And now that we have kids, I mean, obviously they can sing all the songs and they know all the guests. But I bought him, I was thinking, what can I do for Casey's birthday? It's a big birthday, but how can I make it whimsical? So I got him Muppet balloons, and we were playing Muppet music and old school 70s, 80s, amazing stuff. And now, when he turned 46, I actually got a custom-made Dr. Teeth. It's phenomenal. It's everything you want Dr. Teeth to be, and it's sitting prominently in his office. So we're complicated people. We're giant nerds, and we love it.
Well, we're giant nerds down here too, so we'll have to talk about that at the dinner party.
Can we have a dinner party? When can we have a dinner party? 2050?
Yeah, before that, I hope.
I hope so. We're not vaccinated up here in Canada, so, we'll see.
We read that all the Canadians, they're driving across the border and then flying to their vacation homes in the U.S. because they can't fly into Canada, but they can drive across.
If you try to make sense of COVID rules, it'll break your brain. Especially what's happening right now up here. I'm obviously a big Canadian, proud Canadian. I'm an immigrant twice over. We chose to make this our home. But right now it's tricky up here. It really boggles the mind. So a lot of the rules don't really make sense, and people feel the need to drive down to the U.S. to get vaccines because we can't really get them that freely up here. But that's for a different show.
Now, you grew up in Soviet Russia. What was the jazz scene like over there?
Well, I was a kid, so I wouldn't really know. All I know, when we left for Israel, I was almost 7. But I know from my dad that there wasn't much of a performance scene, obviously, because the theaters and everything else was kind of like music was sanctioned. So music that was not sanctioned by the state was performed in people's homes. So people played Beatles music and they played jazz in their homes. And I remember my parents, when I was like very, very young, I have vivid recollections of our one-bedroom Soviet apartment. And you want to talk about architecture or the absence of? We can talk about Soviet buildings, even though they were all supposed to be built according to this very strict architectural system, right? As we know from Le Corbusier and all that stuff, that's where the theory was coming from. In the end, it was all very drab concrete buildings for the most part, but they were piled full of people. Everybody had a guitar. Everybody was singing. Beatles songs was very obviously, poor English. Nobody understood what the words meant. So the jazz scene, per se, I don't think that jazz was widely performed, but there was a very active black market for jazz LPs. So there were times during the Soviet Union when there was a thaw in the relations in the West, and then it would close back up again. So my father's record collection was put together for the most part on the black market, where people traded Levi jeans, which were contraband, for jazz albums or Beatles albums or Ray Charles albums, which were also contraband, for food and chickens. And it was Soviet Union was a very interesting place to come from. It had its challenges, but the survivalist aspect of it prepared my parents for the immigration experiences that were also quite difficult.
And your next stop was Israel?
My next stop was Israel, yeah, where we spent 10 years.
In 2016, and I'm reading this was 2 weeks after giving birth, you recorded Yiddish Glory, the lost songs of World War II.
Yes.
In Yiddish?
In Yiddish, yes, which is not a language that a Milman has spoken since really my grandparents were children.
Okay. And this went on to be nominated for a Grammy. Oh.
It was nominated for a Grammy, and it was a very interesting project that I wanted to record not because I'm such a Yiddishist, but because it allowed me to tell the stories of my grandparents' World War II experience, which, I feel like the West is very familiar with the German, French, Polish, Jewish experience during the war, but the Soviet experience for Jews was very, very different, and it's not as widely understood. So it was a very personal project for me. So when they told me the recording date was going to be beginning of January, and I told them, well, that's my due date. I was due January 1st. And they said, no, you really have to do it. And I said, okay, if I'm not having a C-section, I'm going to do it. And I ended up committing myself. I stretched myself fully, and it was hard. It was really, really hard because I was completely exhausted and, no sleep. But it ended up being a very special project to be part of. And it was like a historical document more than, pieces of music. But it was very meaningful for me.
Are there any Yiddish tunes that sort of made it to the West and got different words put to them? I was wondering.
Yeah, I think By Mir Bist Shane made it to the West. And you know that one?
That was the Andrews Sisters?
Yeah, by me, Mr. Shane, please let me explain. I mean, obviously there were no English lyrics, right?
Right.
Originally it was fully Yiddish, but it became a huge hit. Like, who would have expected, right?
That is so weird. That is one of my favorite songs.
Yeah, and it was originally a Yiddish.
Did they take just the melody, or are those the lyrics translated into English that the Andrews sisters sang, or did they write new words?
I think there were translated lyrics.
It was a hybrid too, yeah.
Again,
okay.
Yeah, I am not somebody, I love klezmer music, mostly wordless, to be honest with you. You know, that whole romanticization of shtetl life, that's not really my thing. But because my grandparents' parents and my grandparents' first earliest language was Yiddish, you know, for the most part, and this project really sought to tell the stories in their most authentic form, it had to be in Yiddish because those victims, heroes, all, you know, the album really, children, adults, it spanned all aspects of the Soviet Jewish experience during the war. They were all written in Yiddish. I don't want to make it all bleak, but I come from there's a lot of history, and it's very, very complex, but fundamentally it's a story of survival. And my parents kind of continued that in their own lives. And my own experience kind of mimics that too, albeit on a much different, smaller scale. But that album is special for me.
Watch What Happens was a song written by Michel Legrand, French, not Canadian, for the 1964 movie The Umbrellas of Cherbourg, a breakout film for the breathtakingly attractive Catherine Deneuve, who literally went on to be the symbol of beauty for the nation of France. With English lyrics by Norman Gimbel, this song has been covered by Sarah Vaughan, Frank Sinatra, Count Basie, Tony Bennett, and now, from her album, In the Moonlight, here's Sophie.
Start believing in you. Let her hold out her hand. Let her touch you and watch what happens. Want someone who can look in your eyes and see into your heart. Let her find you and watch what happens. Oh, no, I won't believe your heart is cold. Maybe just afraid to be broken again. Let someone with a deep love to give that deep love to you, and what magic you'll see. Let someone give her heart, someone who cares like me. deep love to give that deep love to you, and what magic you'll see. Let someone give her heart, someone who cares like me. Let it be me.
Wow, Sophie, that was great.
Thank you. Thank you. Randy Brecker on trumpet. Can you just, can you believe how good he sounds?
Oh, it's fabulous.
That explains why it sounds so good.
Now, like all performers, Sophie, you've been stranded because of COVID and haven't been able to get out on the road, but you wrote a really great article recently about some of the problems facing youth in lockdown. What was that about?
I'm looking at my kids. My kids are 5 and just turned 8. You know, it's not just COVID that's keeping me off the road. It's them. They're keeping me off the road a little bit, you know, because I really want to be around. But I was watching the way these lockdowns were affecting them. And I believe that I'm very, very lucky. I live in a, nicely sized home. I have a big backyard. My kids are really little. But I have a lot of friends with older kids. And I was just beginning to feel absolutely horrified by what was happening to kids, because the focus was almost entirely on the older generation, the vulnerable seniors, et cetera, and there was almost no mention, really no discussion of what prolonged closures, what cancellation of sports programs, what this online life, what toll that was taking on kids of all ages, but especially young people in very, very pivotal, critical times in their lives. People in their early teens who are vulnerable to a lot of kind of depression, online bullying, mental illness, etc. It has put a brake on literally on people's lives. And we will never know the opportunity cost of that until much later. What paths went untaken, what things were undiscovered. And I think that alongside the COVID numbers, I believe that it's very important to report those numbers. I think that it's a terrible disease. I think what we're seeing with the variants now is it's upsetting, it's unnerving, and especially in Canada where the vaccination rate has not been as aggressive as it has been in the U.S. over the last couple of months. But the rate of kids dropping out of school, the rate of kids with eating disorders. So I don't want to depress y'all, but I think about that, and it really, really bothers me. And they just now started talking about it as a thing, what it's like for a kid at home without access to crayons. You know?
Right.
There's lots of that going on.
We're going to be dealing with this for some time to come.
And when people compare this to war, my grandparents all lived through World War II, and my grandmothers especially, all my grandfathers were in the war. So on one hand, we can say, well, people survived worse things. Well, they survived, but at what cost? I can tell you that the cost to mental health and physical health and kind of opportunities, it was immense. And I think that if our leaders took all the aspects of things into account, I think things could have looked a little bit differently. We could have protected the elderly, but also not denied our children a more normal, psychologically stable period of time, if you know what I'm saying.
Well, we're sure Justin Trudeau listens to U.S. Modernist Radio.
I know. I know. He reads my tweets.
Oh.
This next song was written by Canadians, of course, Mark Jordan and Steve McKinnon. From Sophie's album, Make Someone Happy, for which she won that Juno, here's Something in the Air Between Us.
stars, the secret life of planet Mars, somewhere I can feel the sun. There's something in the air between us. Let it rain, nothing ever stays the same. Your tears are falling in my dreams. There's something in the air between us. I've been soaring like a cloud. I call your name out loud in taxis and in towns. And I have walked upon the beach, a rainbow within reach, the borderlines of love. Oh, drive me home, the night is burning gypsy red. I hear your voice inside my head. Oh, there's something in the air between us. In my room, the algebra of love and you is measured out in coffee spoons. There's something in the air between us. And when the night plays your guitar, I want to be with you, no matter where you are. And as the cars and lights go by, I'll shine there in your eyes until the moon and stars collide. And when the night plays your guitar, I want to be with you, no matter where you are. And as the cars and lights go by, I'll shine there in your eyes until the moon and stars collide. Something in the air between us. Something in the air between us. Something in the air between us.
Wow, that was beautiful, Sophie.
Thank you so much.
Languid, sexy,
Yeah.
and
Now,
Canadian.
hey, where can people see you perform this fall? Have you got any bookings lined up?
I don't. I mean, and that's the thing. We're not. Very few people up here are fully vaccinated yet, so I don't know. I think we're going to have to wait and see. I have a website. I'm a little bit on, social media, so definitely when there's stuff, I'll be announcing it. But nothing booked right now. I'm not a huge. I've done a few online performances, and it's got a feel, but there's nothing quite like an audience, in
Right.
person.
Yeah. Tell us your website.
www.sophiemilman.com.
And that's MILMAN.
No second
Yes, sir.
L.
No second L.
No second L. It's very confusing. I can't tell you how many times I arrived in the city and the big marquee on the theater has 2 L's. And then I'm like, do I really need to make a thing and get a guy and get a ladder, right? I'm that kind of person. So sometimes I'd leave it. If my husband was with me, he'd be like, Change it right now.
Right.
Casey, come on.
At least it doesn't say "and puppet show," like in Spinal Tap.
Yeah.
Really? I would love it.
Well, this has been delightful. Thank you so much, Sophie.
Thank you, George. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Wendy Robineau and Don Beskin, and by Modernist Realtor Angela Roll. Okay, Tom, take us out.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 8,000 significant modernist houses, and access 3.2 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Rogue archivist Carrie Cesarino researches Canadian guests with the same passion she shares for Justin Bieber. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I'll be back soon with another Oh Canada, We Stand on Guard for Thee edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.